Okay, welcome everyone to the Poetry Box Live. Our next featured poet is going to be Tiel Aisha Ansari, who is the first place winner of our Poetry Box Chapbook Prize for 2020. That was judged by Amy Miller, who said of her collection, "The day of my first driving lesson is a rare love letter to good parents and the legacy of compassion they leave behind." Tiel is a Sufi warrior poet. She works as a data analyst and professional curmudgeon for the Portland Public School District and is president emerita of the Oregon Poetry Association. She now hosts the Wider Window Poetry Show, promoting the work of poets of color on KBOO Community Radio. Her work has been featured in Fault Lines Poetry, Windfall, KBOO, and Everyman's Library Anthology, among others. Her other collections include Country Well Known as an Old Nightmare Stable and Dervish Lions, forthcoming for Fernwood Press. We're very excited about her winning chapbook here, The Day of My First Driving Lesson. I'll put the link in the chat room so you can pre-order it. It's coming out in January. So please welcome Tiel Aisha Ansari.
Thank you, Shawn. And I'd also like to thank the Poetry Box. These small presses are such a vital resource for poetry, and it's really great to have one here in our own town, even though they obviously publish internationally. I'd also like to thank Amy Miller for judging the contest and looking kindly on my entry. And I want to give a special shout out to Penelope Scambly-Schott, who many of you know, and who really inspired the form behind this chapbook. A little bit of background on this: my father passed away in January of 2018, and my mother a little over a year later. And very shortly after my mother died, I had the opportunity to attend a workshop with Penelope on writing poem series. And I had been struggling to write about all this loss, and I saw that, one poem was never going to do it. So I could write a series of poems about this. So I want to dedicate this reading to my parents in loving memory, James Spurgeon Jackson Jr. and Maria Mae Jackson. I'm going to read the first poem in the book. The poems in this book don't exactly have titles, but each one says what year, more or less, it occurs in. And they're not necessarily in chronological order. However, the first poem in the book does happen to be the earliest one. 1960. The day my parents went to get the wedding license, the registrar told them the law required a blood test. The reason was syphilis, but no one ever said so. My father's friend Ralph was the son of a doctor. He opened his office for them, although it was a Saturday. Ralph was a witness at the wedding, and later he married a girl who wasn't Jewish. His father never spoke to him again. My mother's parents didn't approve of my dad, but they came to the wedding and signed the guest book, their names in Chinese. In the photo, my parents look impossibly young. On the license, my father's side says colored. My mother's side says yellow. And the photo that is referenced in this poem appears as part of the cover image that Shawn just showed you, and also on the first page where this poem appears, there's a reproduction of my parents' marriage license. So you can see for yourself what that poem was talking about. One of the things that's a little unusual about my background is that I spent 10 years in Tanzania growing up, from 1971 to 1981, and my parents taught high school there. And this next poem is about that, although it actually starts before we went there. 1968. The day John and Tommy raised black-gloved fists over Olympic gold and under the stars and stripes, I was 4 years old. Maybe my parents saw the salute. They would have watched the sprint. My dad was track and field in college. In high school, he played hoops. When I was 6, we had a Philadelphia 76ers basketball, red, white, and blue. It was miniature, a toy for kids. We could palm it, pretend to be Wilt the Stilt Chamberlain, or Luel Sindor, who later changed his name, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, superstar, first Muslim in the NBA. Da coached basketball at every school he worked at in Tanzania, on ragged asphalt, red as dirt, hoops rusted, bent, bare of nets. The boys used whitewash to draw the sidelines, key, free throw line. My father brought his own whistle and stopwatch. My mother mimeographed diagrams of the pitch and plays, carried them on a green vinyl clipboard. My father ran drills, dribble, bounce pass, dribble, chest pass, free throw, free throw, free throw. Pass around the key and shoot, I sat in the dry grass and watched. Pass around the key and shoot. Then choose up teams in scrimmage, zone defense, man-to-man, boys I thought were men, tall as my father. 7 a.m. to 4 p.m., my father stood at green chalkboards, chalk dust between his fingers, in front of these tall boys folded into children's desks, white cotton shirts and indigo shorts, and taught them biology, physics, the foundations of science. They never won a lot of games. They went on to be doctors, engineers, government ministers, all the heroes a newborn country needs. My father was a coach of champions. Back then, the zone defense was legal in the pros. The three-point shot wasn't a thing yet. The college basketball tournament goes by a lot of different names: March Madness, Sweet 16, Elite 8, Final Four. My parents watched it every year together. I watched it with my mother the last week of her life. She never got to see the end of the tournament. My father had a severe stroke in 2015, which basically began the decline that would end in his death. So this is 2015. The day my father woke and found himself strange, found only haze in his hazel eyes. The sun rose smoke-stained to bitter orange. A storm of wings and beaks darkened the sky, hazing the clarity of his hazel eyes. A mass confusion, mad swirl of birds whose wings and beaks occupied the skies. My hands were empty. I had only words. In mass confusion, mad swirl of birds, there his brain hovered in helpless haze. My hands were empty. I offered words as a thread, perhaps, to lead him out of the maze. My father's brain has hovered in haze since the day he fell under the lightning stroke. What thread could lead him out of this maze? The east wind's kiss tasted of smoke. Since the day of the lightning stroke, the day that the sun rose stained bitter orange, the east wind's kiss has lingered in smoke, foreboding a cruel and lasting change. And my father wakes and finds himself strange. That poem actually resonates a whole lot differently after the events of this summer. Those of you who are living in the Central Valley probably experienced a lot of the smoke and heat. I'm going to read the title poem of the book, although I feel like that's a little bit of a misnomer because the poem itself does not actually have a title, but books have to have titles. 1982. The day of my first driving lesson, my mother said, "Think of the wheel as a clock face, your hands at 10 and 2, which made my destination always high noon, and the choices before me, love, duty, fear. 6 at the wheel's bottom, 6 was behind me, but no one gave me a 6-gun or a 6-point star or a guide to my character. Hero, villain, Quaker bride, or dark-skinned woman of a certain reputation? I learned that it's no good watching the clock. No one will tell you when you're called to be a hero. You have to be ready whenever that noon train rolls in. My mother gave me a whole lot of good advice. This poem's about that. 1969, so I was 5. The day I got the best advice of my life was the day I asked my mother, why do some kids believe in Santa? I knew where gifts came from. Grandparents sent them. Aunts and uncles, family friends, real people. Christmas meant leaving Philadelphia in the dark. Cold dawn over domes with chemical names looming above the marshes along the New Jersey Turnpike, among strange stinks that woke me in the back seat. Across tidal flats with no sea in sight, Manhattan's skyline floated against a smoggy horizon, gray towers over a tangle of asphalt loops, rows of brownstones, cliffs of New York granite. In the shadow of the George Washington Bridge, which I thought of as an extra grandparent, we ate roast lamb with macaroni and cheese with my father's family in Yonkers. Or after a visit to the Buddhist temple in the Bronx, noodle soup, stewed pork hocks, peanut and pressed tofu salad. I said we shouldn't leave the tree in case the glass birds ate the toy fruit decorations. Grown-ups called me imaginative. We unwrapped presents, thank you hugged the givers, played Pounce and Scrabble, went to bed in guest rooms, or fell asleep in homebound cars, clutching new toys and warm with hugs. I couldn't see what Santa had to do with it. I had to ask. My mother said, some people think lying to children doesn't count as lying. I've actually never trusted a grown-up since then. So after we moved back from Tanzania in 1982, my parents moved out to Hawaii. And this poem is 1982 to 2019. The day my parents moved into their new house in Hawaii was the day Kilauea began to erupt. It was spring. The jacarandas were blooming. All the hills above Kona were draped in violet blossoms. We drove to Volcano National Park and sat in the drizzle watching fire fountains dance in the caldera. Lava flowed off and on for the next 37 years. Hot stone poured over the cliffs, ate its way through lush forests, pushed new black cliffs out into the ocean, burned homes, buried whole towns under new landscapes. My dad retired from teaching and volunteered at the park. The summer after he died, Kilauea's summit shook and collapsed. The visitors center at the park was abandoned. My mother sent boxes of keepsakes to my brother and me. Sulfur steam poured from vents and wrapped the slopes in toxic smoke. People coughed and cursed, rubbed itching eyes, drove for miles to find clean air on windward shores. Flowering trees withered in the acid fog. Kilauea coughed out her last lava flows in November. The eruption was officially over. My mother died in March. Ferns were sprouting from cooled lava. The last jacarandas produced a few pale leaves. The whole national park will have to be rebuilt. I'd like to close with one poem from my forthcoming book, Dervish Lions, which will be out from Fernwood Press sometime in the coming year, probably March or April-ish. And it's titled Bottle Without a Message. The bottle was empty. There was no folded paper or leaf with letters cleverly pricked into it, stuffed inside. There was no label. No drink me tag, no emblem cast into the colorless glass. But the wind across the neck whispered like a breeze in a grove of palms that covers an entire continent. Remember, And using the thick base of the bottle as a lens, I set fire to the wreckage of my lifeboat, and the blaze was visible for miles. And in the morning, the same knot letters spelled out the names of God on a lateen sail standing in to shore. Thank you.
Thank you, Teal. That was wonderful. And I have to commend you on being able to write such a moving book as a tribute to your parents so soon after they passed. That's pretty remarkable. And the stories are throughout this book are just wonderful. And they have all these, there's phenomenal things that happen because of the location of all the wonderful places you've lived. But then there's all these just wonderful everyday moments when I think about things that I miss about my parents or things that I miss about being with my kids, it's all those little tiny everyday things that seem to matter. And you did a really great job of highlighting so many of those so beautifully. So thank you for that. So thanks again for joining us today. Take care and be safe wherever you are.